Welcome to the CGPro podcast. This is episode 83 with Jack Dartford. And if you enjoy today's episode, we'll be back with another one in a couple of weeks. We also have CGPro is a school, and we have an open day coming up in April. So if you want to come and check us out as a school, come check out an open day. You can come and have a chat, see some of the things we do, get a free lesson. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jack today. Jack is a virtual production supervisor, has worked on some awesome projects, some of the kind of formative virtual production projects with Lux, things like Barbie and House of the Dragon and many other things. But Jack, I'm going to leave the rest of the introduction to you, so you'll do a better job, I'm sure. But welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
That's great. So I think I started out a while ago. I studied at university. I studied live events, actually. I didn't study film traditionally. I think I've always had a very keen interest in immersive technology, whether that be in live events, film, TV, or even theme entertainment. I think as a kid, I was always very interested in how it all just kind of worked, how it all functioned. You know, you go on a dark ride as a child, like Disney or something, and all the animatronics kind of happen at certain times, all the lighting changes, and it makes you feel a certain way. And I think that, at a young age, always really interested me. So did film, specifically CGI, making things that aren't real. Who doesn't find that interesting? And virtual production for me is all of that combined. You're immersing actors, you're bringing fantasy realities to life in the name of film and TV. And I think bringing that to another audience at home is great. It's really cool. To be able to have those technologies and push them out there is great. And so as I say, I studied live events primarily to go into the industry as a lighting designer and video designer. I got to a point where I was working at a few festivals, things were going quite well. And then COVID came along, obviously shattered those dreams. I had to work out where I was going to go next. And I was introduced to somebody from a company called Build when I was at university, one of my lecturers, and I did a few jobs for them, nothing too crazy, but it did introduce me to the world of VFX, content creation, stuff like that. And they knew that I was familiar with Unreal and I knew how to code and kind of had the right head for the sort of virtual production job. And so they said to me, fresh out of university, do you want to go to Warner Brothers to work on House of the Dragon? And I think quite naively, I thought, I can do that. I've done it at home. I've done it in my bedroom. It's fine. I get to set and I see what is now a fairly average sized volume, maybe, but it was huge. It was a big volume, and it scared the life out of me because I realised that this is so much more complex than I thought it was going to be. And I guess I just kind of got into it like that. I started to make tools, started to operate more. Slowly got introduced to the world of film. That was a world that I always wanted to go into, but never really ended up going down there until that point in time, I guess. And it was a great new experience. I met loads of great people, and I just kind of fell in love with it, really, and I haven't really looked back since. And I think virtual production allows us to create such immersion for the actors. It can help post in so many ways, especially with things like Ghost Frame, where you can interleave, chroma and content. But yeah, I think it's one of those emerging technologies that's really interesting. I think useful for many people. It's a good place to be, I think.
Very cool. I like how you explained it and described it as being a combination of all of those worlds of making immersive experiences, making that an immersive experience for the actors, bringing together film, all these different technologies. And it borrows a lot from the world of live events, bringing together the world of live events and visual effects and various other things together. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the world of live events. I actually got to this through VJing. I used to do that for clubs in London back in the 90s, and it was cool. It was a great way to understand those kinds of spaces and understand stage and understand they're all different cultures. I'm sure you've experienced that. Like the world of live events is a very different culture than film, and those kind of clashes that happen where like cool things are born in those disagreements.
It's great. It is good. I think there's so much intersection between, as you say, between film, TV, and live shows. Like, as you say, VJing, media servers, all that sort of stuff heavily intersects with playback for virtual production, car shoots, stuff like that. There's such a big intersection there. And like to have to take my knowledge from live shows and putting it straight into virtual production, I think is a really useful tool to have. For instance, what I commonly find myself doing is say there's something in Unreal that we need to animate, but it's animated in a way that's just kind of noisy. It's not necessarily a specific keyframe animation. It's just, there's a light, we want it to flicker, or there's something in the scene we want to have random motion attached to. You can do that in Sequencer, but I think it's kind of laborious to sit there and try to make something random when there's a lighting console there that kind of does this already, right? Like the whole point of a lighting console is to send wave values to a lighting fixture. You can do offsets, phase offsets, you can do sequences, auto timecode if you really wanted to. And so something that I find myself doing is borrowing from, I have like an MA node that I take to shows every now and again. And I drive media servers and I drive Unreal, all using DMX, because I think that really cuts out quite a laborious task of sitting there and hand programming something that is already there's already a tool that does this out of the box. I might as well just use that sort of thing.
That's interesting. Those problems have been solved in a different area in a different way, and you're able to bring the advantages of that because they figured out how do you do that when you're sat at a desk with a piece of animation software in front of you, but when you're in a live environment, what you're wanting to adjust it live and do all of those things in real time.
I think it's, especially on set, every second really does count. Especially as a supervisor, you need to make sure that everything's happening. You need to be really well informed by your operators, how long things take to get done, because you need to let people know. But having tools that allow you to make real-time adjustments actually in real time, like using Sequencer to adjust something, and then 10 minutes later you're still making a sequence. It's great, but it's not. It could be faster, and using tools that were made for that sort of random, value assignment in a sort of a way, I think really, really helps speed up the process.
Going back to your kind of earlier days, what do you think, what helped you get to the point of being offered that position? Somebody came to you seeing something in you, seeing that you had this combination of skills that was very suitable for this sort of relatively new kind of environment. What were some of the things that you studied or taught yourself that helped you acquire that skill set?
Sure. So obviously, having gone to university to study live events, it's most of the technology that we use now in LED volumes comes from that world, right? Like LED walls, LED processing, that was all born in advertising and live shows. That's where it kind of comes from. So I already had a knowledge of how the video side of the infrastructure functions, which is already a massive asset, right? Because you understand how it all kind of fits together. I already had the IT knowledge. Again, having to learn how networking functions across live shows is a whole, that's quite deep sometimes, especially on arena shows where you've got fiber going everywhere. So those two things, I think, pique people's interest, because then suddenly you have an idea not just about how Unreal works, but at a deeper level of, I need this hardware to achieve this goal, and I know that I need this network to talk to these things, and I now know how to do that. I think Unreal for me was another extension of just another real-time tool to use. In live shows, we have Touch Designer, Notch. They're also real-time content creation platforms, although kind of specializing in maybe different things. Unreal is more game creation, film, TV now, I guess, as well. Whereas Notch is more motion graphics, Touch Designer is more generative graphics. But it's having the right brain of not just thinking on a surface level, here's Unreal, I know Unreal, but to be able to actually help out with the network infrastructure, the physical, how it all fits together, even the physics of it, right? I mean, there's a reason volumes are shaped how they are, so you don't get as many off-axis angles. And so having all of that knowledge, I think, really proves beneficial, because then you know not just how to operate Unreal, but how the whole kind of cake comes together.
And you mentioned programming as well, making software or coding. Is there something which you taught yourself, or is that something that was part of the study you did, or how did you get that?
I've always enjoyed programming on whatever level it is. I wouldn't say I'm a genius coder, but I know my way around certain languages. I think at university, it was just something that I picked up because it was just necessary. I think I saw a lot of holes in software that I just wanted to be able to fill, right? Like for my thesis, I ended up making an online Unreal Engine concert. So people, this is during COVID as well, hence why I chose to do that. And it was all revolving around, well, I have this concert, right? I could mocap all of these, all the talent, take the audio feeds, take the lighting control feeds, pipe that to an AWS server, which has the game on it, as it were, which has, which takes all that data in and applies it to digital, virtual lighting fixtures. The audio would react similarly to how it would react if you were in the venue. You have the mocap talent. So that's kind of, a lot of that requires software, right? That doesn't really kind of exist. It exists in multiple different packages, but not in one. And so that's where I started to learn Python and C++ to kind of try and aid with the development of that, I guess. And then, there's lots of other things, especially in Unreal. The whole engine is made on C++. So knowing C++ and Python, honestly, if I had to recommend two languages, I'd recommend those two, especially with the emergence of AI and stuff like that, which heavily relies on Python. It's very useful.
So it's really born, what I was hearing there was that it was born out of kind of a frustration of
exactly
not having the tools exist that you wanted to exist and needing to go and make them.
And it's just like simple tools, right? A lot of the issues that I had revolved around time aligning data packets over a network, right? And there's no tool really that I can think of or that I could find that just did that. And so you end up kind of making a software package that time aligns data packets, that reads out, and does like the time delay adjustment, stuff like that. And I've made lots of weird pieces of software, stuff that converts DMX to like ArtNet to serial data, things like that, for really niche use cases. I think it's really powerful to be able to have a knowledge of software development. So if you do face a situation like that, you can just develop your way around it instead of being limited to the box that you're in, sort of thing.
Right. Now, how did you find the process of kind of, sounds like you were teaching yourself, essentially.
Yes.
Did you do any kind of courses online? Did you just try to jump in? What was it like?
It was a lot of, I would think of something that I wanted to make. I always try to start with a calculator app. I feel like that is a good place to start, right? So the first thing I did in C++ was making like a UI calculator sort of situation, because it gives you enough knowledge about control flow, kind of like the base level understanding of how it all goes together, certain functions that you probably end up using constantly, how data types work, stuff like that. And so that's kind of how you start out. And then I thought, well, now I can kind of get my way around this. Let's work towards my goal, right? I want to be able to, make a blueprint function in Unreal that doesn't exist yet. How do I get there? And so you start making smaller things like hello world functions that just present the idea, sort of, if that makes sense. And you kind of build up into larger and larger and larger and larger, and you add to it. It's the way I tend to learn that sort of thing is I want to do this thing, and I learn how to get to that point. And on the way you're learning, you think, oh, what's this do? How does this work? And you kind of go down that rabbit hole. And it's not necessarily, I didn't really do any courses per se. I read a few books, kind of more as reference, if anything. But it's just about going down that rabbit hole and discovering a whole world of just programming language. I think is so interesting.
Lots of rabbits in there. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, it's endless, really, the number of problems that you can solve with programming. But really great to hear about how you approached it with doing something that was solving a real problem and something that would pull you through it, but also stepping aside from the problem you were solving to solve a slightly different one that was completable and relatively straightforward, something you could finish, take on. Yeah, that's cool. It's an interesting thing that comes up a lot. I think is a fantastic thing for just about anyone to have some amount of programming knowledge, even if you're not going to be a software engineer, just to have that kind of mindset. Yeah. It's cool to hear about how you approached it, because I think it's often something which puts people off.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I did it that way. Because I always found like, there's so many courses online, there's like 9-hour YouTube videos I can watch. And it's just really, I got quite impatient because I knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't quite know how to get there. I didn't want to watch a 9-hour video on the basics of C++. I wanted to just do the thing. And so I found that Googling around the idea, kind of, you go on a journey where it's a journey of failures, right? You hit a brick wall. It's like, well, why did I hit this brick wall? And then you hit another brick wall. And you do get there. And I think on the way, you learn so much valuable information that comes from that. All the errors that you've met, all the warnings that you've met. even the IDE that you're using, right? Like you suddenly learn how all of these things fit together. And I don't know if it's the best way to do it, but it's the way that I've done it, and it seems to be working okay for me. It's just going at a challenge and just working out the best way to do it.
Was there resources that you used along the way in terms of asking people questions, or any communities that helped? Or
Uh, Not particularly. I feel like I would have done myself a favor if I did do that. There is literally a massive C++ manual online, which is very boring to read through. I'm not going to lie,
they're
it's
not the kind of
very,
books
very
that you're
boring.
like reading back to back necessarily, unless you
No,
want to go to sleep.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting to sort of get stuck in and learn about everything. Again, it's at such a low level understanding, you know, that you have to have with C++, because if you have your own memory management, it doesn't do it for you. It's a lot more manual than Python. That can be quite jarring sometimes, but I think once you get the hang of it, it's very, very powerful.
Right. What did you find that it had any kind of knock-on effects in terms of your problem-solving ability in other areas? Just going
Yeah,
through that.
I think having the attitude not of complete, I'm trying to think how to word it. It's instead of looking at a problem and getting intimidated by everything that you need to know instantly, it's about kind of, well, here's the problem that I have. So what do I need to know from that massive set of data to be able to solve this problem? Because nine times out of 10, you don't need to know everything about it. You just need to know things that pertain to that. And that's what I kind of learned from doing it that way, is instead of looking at C++ or Python or whatever programming it is as a whole, look at what you're trying to do and then try to get there. Because 9 times out of 10, by doing that, you'll learn so much other stuff on the way, because you'll have to be able to get there. It's just more engaging, I think, to be able to do getting to a goal than just learning things that don't necessarily seem relevant to you.
Right. Sounds like school, where you've been taught a bunch
Exactly.
of stuff that you're like, what is this for? Why am I bothering with this? Being more applied, being that you're solving a
Yeah,
real problem, the one that you care about, it pulls you through the experience
exactly.
of those annoying moments where nothing's working, you don't understand why, but like you want to get through it because you know
Yeah,
you care about the outcome.
exactly. And you do end up learning that stuff that you didn't necessarily want to learn, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because on the way, it kind of breaks it down, right? Instead of looking at this massive wall of, I have to learn all of this, you kind of break down bricks of the wall as you go, sort of thing. You know, I've had this issue, so it must be related to this, and you learn about that. And you have another issue, and it must be related to that, and you learn about that. And slowly, you kind of take the bricks out of the wall until there's no wall left, and you've kind of hit all these different goals that you want to hit, and you just become more fluent in doing those tasks.
Yeah, it's a really great way of understanding problem solving. I've always felt that's why I think everybody would benefit from it, even if they're not going to
Mm.
use it, just because of what it forces you to do. What you're describing now, which is breaking down problems effectively. A big problem seems really hard to solve
Yeah,
unless you break it down to a whole bunch of small problems, and smaller problems
exactly.
are
Yeah,
easier to solve.
yeah.
And
It
very
helps with
often,
the on-set stuff as well, I think.
right. Yeah, it's kind of a mentality almost,
Yeah,
as a way of
yeah,
seeing things. If you not because on set you're in a world where there's high stress, there's high stakes
yeah,
and big problems.
yeah.
Combined with that can be quite intimidating for people. But if you get that kind of, which I can see that you have that kind of calmness of bringing that to those environments, plus the problem solving, is what
Yeah.
does really
It's,
well in those
it's
worlds.
yeah, it's having the ability to switch off kind of everything that's happening around you and focus on exactly what the issue is. Because I think sometimes it can, I've been at fault of this before when I kind of started out, where somebody presents an issue to you on set and you know you didn't have much time to fix it. But instead of looking at, well, this isn't happening, so I should fix this, you kind of go down this weird rabbit hole of, why isn't it happening? And how do we make it not happen? You kind of get a bit lost in what you're actually trying to do. Because what you should be doing is, well, this needs to be shot now, so let's fix it. And even if that's a temporary fix and not the fix that's going to fix it forever, then you should do that. I think it's quite hard to. I'm a bit of a completionist myself, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and starting out was very difficult for me to kind of let go of that and focus on, well, if there's a problem, it just needs to be fixed now. And then when the shoot's done, you can fix it properly for like the next day or, the next shoot, whatever. And it's kind of having that mentality of having the specific part of your problem solving brain active, not the one that's trying to look at the whole picture, but the one that knows there's a goal that you need to get to. And so I now need to go down this route to just patch it over and somehow make it work.
Still trying to figure out how to turn that part of mine off.
I mean, me too sometimes.
that desire to do it the right way versus the way that you need to do it right now. Yeah,
exactly.
That can be quite different. Do you have any kind of tricks to doing that when you're in that kind of environment, of you've got a big crazy problem, and it'd be cool if you got an example of one that you've run into. You've got a big problem and you're in that kind of high stress environment. How do you think, like, your brain can say, I don't know how I'm going to solve this, and you could freak out.
Yeah,
how do you?
It's very difficult, because sometimes there are situations where you'll radio through to the operators and say, what do you think the problem is? And then the answer that you get is, we need 10 minutes to work out what the problem is.
Yeah.
And that's the most difficult one to convey to ADs, because, ADs just want to know, okay, is it going to take 10 minutes to fix,
Yeah.
Because they're used to a lens encoder's broken, we just need to recalibrate it or something like that. This is more, because it's so new still, the issue doesn't necessarily just present itself as an issue. It could be an actor in the scene or a blueprint in the scene that's screwing you over somewhere else, sort of thing. And it's not necessarily obvious. I had one of these just before Megalopolis, where it would launch, and just before it's finalized all the assets in the scene, it just crashed every single time. And the error was kind of ambiguous. I think the error was something like, there's a mismatch between the amount of actors that's been loaded for the inner frustum and the outer frustum, and it just crashed. And we're going through the engine code and trying to work out, what was this? What was causing this? And I think there was literally a comment in the engine code that was like, this should be turned off unless necessary. And so I just commented out that block of code and it worked fine.
Nice.
It's like, exactly. It's having stuff like that if you're on set and you don't have time to do that, it can be really frustrating, because you just need to make something work. But yeah, I think it's just having the ability to, if you walk around, I found this very, very quickly out. I found this out very, very quickly early on in my career. If you walk around sweating and looking concerned, that's definitely not the way to do things.
I would agree.
It's being able to switch off the kind of the people mode, as I call it, and just focus on, I need to communicate this problem as efficiently as I can and give them as much information as I have in a way that makes sense to them, so they can do what they want with that. Because a lot of what ADs are trying to do is they're just trying to organize time. They're just trying to work out where people should be at different times. And if someone radios through an issue to you and you panic and you don't want to have that awkward conversation with somebody, that's going to make your life a lot worse. And so I think it's having gone through that and knowing that pain, I now find it a lot easier to approach people and say, hey, we need like 10, 15 minutes here. We might not necessarily know what's wrong, but we can update you as we go. We think it's going to be 10 minutes until we have an answer. And just being completely transparent. Because a lot of the time people find that, that's much better for them. It's more useful for them. They can organize, they can do their job while you do your job. But withholding information, that's where it all starts to fall apart, I think.
It's so much of this stuff becomes great life advice outside of this environment.
Yeah, it does.
When you think about it, it's like, that would work really well in like my relationship, or just about any area. Just being really honest with people, being transparent, telling them all the things you know, the things you don't.
So I think stress comes from, I've always thought that stress comes from an issue that you don't communicate to people, or something that you don't necessarily have control over, right? So being on set, if I get stressed about something, it's identifying what that stress is related to. Is it something that is potentially going to go wrong? Is it something that is actively going wrong? And instead of withholding it and being in constant fear, it's just about sharing it with people. Like if the gaffers suddenly decided to point all the lights down at the LED wall and suddenly your black level's been lifted to like a mid-grey, that's really not the best thing in the world. And it can feel quite daunting at first, being on set, having to talk to somebody and say, I don't think that's such a good idea, because, further down the line, that's going to cause you issues. But it's about how you present yourself, how you communicate that, I think it's just honesty. Because if it gets to the point where it's been shot and then people find out that was the wrong decision to make, they'll kind of look at you and say, well, why didn't you tell me? Like, you're here to do that job.
Right.
Tell me. And I think that helped me out a lot is stepping into it and not having that imposter syndrome and knowing that I am there to have those conversations. That's what you're doing as a supervisor, is you're there to communicate all of those issues, mild or really quite bad. That's your job, to point out things that could be done better, even to help post. Once you really step into it, your presence becomes, your confidence gets better and people start to look at you more fondly.
Right. Yeah. Having that like faith, that confidence, and knowing that you don't necessarily have to know everything all the time,
Exactly.
instantly, but there are certain ways of operating and being where generally people, it's about managing expectations. And if they're expecting something right now and they're not getting it, then you're being proactive in
Yes, exactly.
helping them understand what's going on. Then people are usually acting like an AD might get angry if they're fearful about not being able to keep their production moving, or the cost of it, or what's the director thinking or the client thinking, and being
Exactly.
sensitive to those kinds of things, which you learn by being in that environment and being in that culture.
Yeah.
Understanding what those people are going through and what they need.
Exactly. Yeah. It's having that, as you say, that understanding for everybody else's kind of environment as well. VFX constantly get it in the neck sometimes. DIT constantly flooded with requests. But it's knowing who to talk to about certain things. If you have like a color issue, or you want to just check scopes, I'd go to DIT. Even the DOP is a good person to talk to for lighting and stuff like that. And it's just knowing the right people to talk to, even if it is just the AD who will direct you to the right person. But it is just flagging any and all things that you think may become an issue. But it's definitely, you have to phrase it in the right way, because you're not you're not the creative, right? It's more about raising it in such a way that things could be better potentially if we do this. Or if somebody says to you, oh, we can't seem to get much black level out of our driving plate, it's looking around and seeing, well, there's 10 sky panels pointed straight at it, that's probably why. And then telling the AD or the DP or the DIT, if we try to point these fixtures away, you're not necessarily going to lose that effect, but you are going to bring back that black level. And it's just having those conversations in a constructive way and not in kind of like a negative way, I guess.
Not in a way that sounds too much like your own opinion. It's just very objective.
Yeah. More factual.
Yeah, that's cool. There's a few questions that are coming in.
Yeah, sure.
Someone says, you worked on so many amazing productions. What has been a highlight for you so far?
Ooh, that's difficult. I think I can pick one from live shows and one from film. That's a really good one. Megalopolis was great. Although its reception was questionable. I think working on it was a great film to work on. It was a really, really great team of people. Very, very creative. They really were open to kind of like this fluid workflow of, we get to set, we work it out sort of thing as we kind of go. A lot of what they wanted to do was give Francis control over a lot of different elements. So I gave him control of time, because the whole point of the film kind of is the main actor can stop time and then start it again. And he kind of loses that ability as the film goes on. And there's this one scene where he's up in the skyscrapers, like girders. I think he says time stop, and everything around him stops. I think there's like birds, there's clouds, there's like a sun ray that comes down through the clouds. I thought it'd be great if I could give him a controller that did that for him. Francis was funding this film himself. It's one of those key moments that he thought was very important. And so I thought, well, let's give him control over that. Let's allow him to have that moment. And so I spent probably half a day trying to get MIDI, because MIDI doesn't necessarily work too well in Unreal, especially over a clustered system. So I converted MIDI to ArtNet, which then got distributed to all the nodes, and we were controlling ultradynamic sky, as I say, like Niagara systems, stuff like that. It was really, really cool. And in the end, he didn't want to have control because he honestly wanted to just continue directing. I think he had to go of it once, and I was like, I should get back to what I'm actually doing. But it really helped me out a lot, because again, all these animations were controlled through a lighting console, not through sequencer. So when Francis said, can we make the birds slow down on more of a curve, and then that's it, they're going for a take straight away sort of thing. It's all on faders, right? You can do that manually with just your fingers sort of thing. You don't have to sit there, save a keyframe, hope that the cluster doesn't crash, and then, puts them back on the 10 minutes. It's more of like an organic workflow where you can kind of attach a sine wave to something or make something slightly random within a scene. Press a button to run a sequence, and it all just kind of happens. That was a really, really good workflow, and it helped me out a lot because there were so many elements that you wanted to come to a pause at different times. Like it was always coming to a stop at time stop, but it was the way that they came to a stop was different each time. Like the sun ray would come out, I think even after time stop, to kind of enhance him a bit more and stuff like that. It was really much more organic workflow than I think hard coding into sequencer and keyframes.
Right. Yeah. Computers are still so kind of unfriendly to humans in a lot of ways, and we're starting to work out how to interface with them more interestingly. But there's nothing like good old physical objects, and like being able to be a puppeteer and have
for sure.
analog like things you can actually grab hold of, control these kinds of systems.
Yeah, and I think it introduces imperfections which look quite nice.
Right.
Sometimes having that soft curve, it's almost too scientifically accurate.
The shaky hand of an operator in there somewhere.
Maybe not shaky, but having a crash or having to redo keyframes under pressure, it's just they can go for another take, and you can just do things slightly differently and some slower, and then you can do that while they're rolling. You don't have to pause the sequence, change the frame, and then like save it out. Hope it doesn't crash. It just cuts out so much.
It's interesting how virtual production has so much kind of similarity to the theatre world, effectively, creating sort of digital theatre almost.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think coming from live events, I think the being on set was a bit jarring at first because live shows is very much you get in, you load in, you have to just go at it for 8 hours. It works, and then you have to do the show, and then you go out somewhere else. Whereas film is a lot more, it's quite jarring for me because like having come from that, you sit there for a 10-hour day and you shoot sometimes the same thing all day, and you sometimes think, oh, there's not really much going on here. So it's kind of a funny adjustment to have made, but I think it's when you look under the hood, especially having been kind of gone through the operator role, technical director to supervisor, it can be quite hectic sometimes. It's just learning how to deal with it.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting hearing you explaining all the different aspects of it, from the technical side of problem solving through to the human side of problem solving and the creative solutions that you can give to people. And thinking like I had similar experience with Jon Favreau. We created some tools for him to be able to move stuff around in the environment, and it turned out he said, I don't need this, I don't want this, can someone else do this for me? I want to be able to put all my decision making into just thinking about the things that are going on, not having to do them. But
I think it's great to be able to have that though, right? To be able to make those tools and present it to them, because it gives them the option.
In that case, he knew that it was there. He just wanted someone else to be using it, but it forced it to be creative for the rest of the team. And it's interesting how you can invent things, you just don't necessarily know how they're going to get used.
Exactly.
Yeah. A few more questions here. Wow, there's a bunch more. One person is asking, any personal projects that you've worked on outside of the industry that have incorporated some of the aspects that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I had a art installation in London that was for Mental Health Awareness Week, and I think that heavily incorporated a lot of this technology. It was on massive LED screens in an advertising space. It was kind of reacted to the audience. The whole point was trying to show social anxiety and how I perceive it through my own experience with it. And then kind of showing that to other people that may not necessarily have social anxiety, but they might stop and think, so that's what it's like. That's quite difficult. It was essentially a massive particle system that was controlled through the amount of people in the space. So it was creating the tools to take a camera feed, understand how many people are in that space, based off that value, do math in the real-time engine that kind of changed, I think, the turbulence of the particle flow, the size of the particles, the color of the particles, the lighting that lit the particles, and some post-processing effects. That itself was a massive journey because I was shooting Megalopolis at the time, and this kind of came out of nowhere for me a little bit. Originally, I was going to do it in Unreal, so I made the whole thing. Originally I was going to do it in Tux Designer. Made the entire thing in Tux Designer. Tested it on a volume stage, which was a similar size for it. It actually ended up going anyway. It looked great. I then had a harrowing discovery that the particle effect that I was using didn't cluster properly, i.e. it was non-deterministic. It wasn't non-deterministic.
Right.
So it would change in between nodes, right? So say you have a computer rendering a frame and another computer rendering a frame. Computer A would have a different starting point for the particles than computer B. And so you'd get this massive seam down the middle of the two machines where it doesn't go. And it's the same thing in Unreal, right? I mean, you have to make sure everything's deterministic and GPU rendered so that doesn't actually happen. But there was no way to do that at the time in Tux Designer, and it was going to be very expensive to do it, and my budget was about £0, so there was no way it was going to happen. So I then pivoted to Unreal, and bear in mind the system that was at this specific place, I think it was a 22 node system. It's a massive, massive system. That was difficult. And all it was a particle effect, so I thought it'd be quite straightforward. But there were some technical issues along the way, some hardware issues, I think, maybe as well. So I had to adapt again away from Unreal, I think 2 days before it was meant to go live. So it was quite late in the game. And the particle effect itself wasn't the complex part. It was the communication between Ableton Live. I had a good sound designer come in and create spatial audio for the event as well. So it was communicating with all of that, cross-fading between different tracks. It was changing how the effect, particles looked, how lighting looked. All of this from real-time data of people in the space. So I ended up using Ventouse, which I hadn't really used it before, but I could again, my goal was particle simulation and external inputs. So I just learned that and managed to kind of muddle through it a little bit. And it turned out great. But I think, again, learning to adapt with the situation, how things communicate with each other, different types of network packets, what they expect, what different software expects, really diving into just not necessarily just Unreal or the real-time engine, but also what can interact with that, right? Is it DMX? Is it MIDI? Is it serial data? Is it other things like motion control rigs that you need to make software for? Is it anything like that? And it's kind of adapting, kind of rolling with the punches, as it were.
Amazing. Yeah, the more under the hood the more it becomes not about a particular piece of software, just about the problem and the raw elements that you're dealing with. And sometimes having that insight, being able to take a real step backwards and realize that even the program you're in may be not the right solution, which that's a really empowering thing to get to. Really cool project. I'd love to check it out if there's anything online.
It's called Monolith. It was at Outernet, just outside Tottenham Court Road Station.
Right.
It ran, I think, in 2022, mid-2022.
Cool. Very cool. That's my old stomping ground. I used to work in Soho when I was in London.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah, it was all the VFX was going on.
Yeah.
Very, very cool, very much resonate with the mental health. We recently made a VR meditation experience for exactly the same thing as a studio, just to help. It's amazing how you can use some of these skills and tools for other purposes like that, things that you really care about. That's what, to me, art should be. You've got something to say, and it may be your expression is using a technical tool more than a pencil or a paintbrush, but it's effectively that's what art should be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I'm definitely going to check it out, and we'll share links to it with the audience as well.
Nice.
Another question, someone that's just a big one, maybe. What do you see as the future of your industry in the US and abroad?
Oh, that is a really big question. Yeah. That's difficult to answer because everything is so volatile, as we all know at the minute, especially with VFX.
Predicting the future is pretty tricky.
Yes, it is. I can tell you what I know now, and I guess the trending direction that it may go in. It seems like, here in the UK, there's a lot of tax cuts. So we currently, I would say 4 out of 5 studios that I've been to in the past month are at capacity. So they're struggling for space, sort of thing. Warner Brothers is making another lot across the road from the other Warner Brothers lot. So things are definitely busy. I'm quite busy. This is the first week I've had off since the beginning of the year, and it's not doesn't really seem to be slowing down. Good thing for me, not good thing for people in LA, and kind of like what I see as the heart of the industry. It does seem like it's going to move around quite a lot. It's definitely not going to just stay here in the UK. I think there's talks about more like India, Korea, the more Asian sort of area is going to probably become the next hub. That's what I'm hearing through the grapevine. There's a lot more incentive over there that's starting to come through. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, it's tricky to really know where it's going to go.
Yeah,
Watching VFX do the similar things with tax subsidies going from. I came to LA just as all the work was going back to London, where I'd just come from, and bouncing up to Canada, and then across Canada, and then down to India. It's sort of there's an interesting state that industry, the VFX industry, has been in for a while, chasing those kinds of things around the world, and working out whether that's even the solution. I mean, there's obviously places trying to attract the work, but very hard to predict where it's going to go, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Appreciate you sharing your insights, though. That's very cool. So somebody else asked, what would you suggest? It's an interesting question. What would you suggest to learn how to be your own IT department? What would you suggest to learn how to be your own IT department be mandatory for everyone, especially considering the pandemic related issues? I guess someone's asking, like, how can you be like be more self-reliant or that kind of thing in terms of IT? That's what it sounds like.
Okay, yeah, I think it's you think. So if I speak from my perspective, when I was younger, I knew that I wanted to be into live events, in entertainment, maybe film and TV. And so it was understanding, okay, what technology exists in those fields that's commonly used. So for instance, for live events, for me, it was lighting, video, audio. I was never really that interested in audio, so that one fell off the bandwagon fairly quickly. But I was very interested in lighting and video and what you could do with that. And I think even as a kid, I was looking up like what different lighting consoles are, came across MA, Camsys, Ava Lights, and I learned about, well, what consoles do they have? What do these companies have as consoles? What do they do? What does a lighting console do? How does it work? Downloading at the time the free versions of the lighting desks onto a laptop and kind of understanding how it goes together. And then I think when you go down that rabbit hole, you learn about things like ArtNet, SACN, and you think, well, what on earth is that? I've got ports on the back of this desk that does DMX. Why do I need that? And then you start to realize, well, okay, because as soon as you get into an arena space, you need massive, you need fiber switches, you need all this stuff. And you start to understand kind of more pieces of the puzzle and how it comes together to make a show, right? So like, in my head, I was like, how do I make a show? How does this go together? Well, you need a lighting desk, you need lights, you need audio, you need video screen, and something to drive the video screen. So like, how does that all come together? What drives the video screen? What is the video screen? How do you interface with it? And you learn about LED processors, and they kind of demultiplex a signal and then send it out to LED, the actual LED itself, sort of thing. And you kind of go down this rabbit hole of all these different things you need to get a job done. And by doing that, you work out how things fit together. And like a lot of IT to me is not necessarily what's on the computer, but different pieces of the puzzle that go together, right? Say I have 4 laptops for some reason, and they all need to talk to each other.
Only got one lap.
Exactly, yeah. How do I do that? But I don't want to use wireless connection. I want it to be wired. And so then you learn about, well, I need a router. A router does that, right? Or I need like a switch. And then you learn about managed switches and unmanaged switches. And you start to go in this rabbit hole, and then it's kind of about, UDP packets, TCP packets, what do they do? Why are they different? And you do sort of just researching all this stuff and making little projects for yourself at home. You start to piece together the bigger picture, or you make a smaller picture at home that you can then understand how it scales later on.
So what I'm hearing the most in that is curiosity is a
Yes,
big one. Be
definitely.
curious when you see something. Try and understand why that exists and what it does, what it's for,
Yeah, exactly.
and spending time on it. Yeah, and
Yeah,
not getting too distracted by. There's a lot of things you need to learn. Being
yeah,
obviously having that, you've
yeah, yeah, yeah.
obviously spent a lot of time on this and learning it and being thorough with it. So giving it a lot of time.
Exactly. And it does, it's something that does take time. There's not necessarily a course that gives you full IT knowledge because it's very, depends what you want knowledge in, right? If you want IT knowledge in a computer, then you go down that path. But if your end goal is to understand how networks function, how do I set up my own volume? Well, that in itself is a massive rabbit hole. But it's about understanding the different parts that go together, right? So you have a volume is a lot of computers that talk to each other that render graphics. There's the LED, there's the LED processor. Then you kind of, you research what's the signal chain. Signal chains are interesting, right? Because they give you the overview of how things to go together. If you imagine it as like a lot of water, a lot of pipes going into other things that change the pressure of the water and whatnot, you can kind of work out, you see the flow of where things go, right? All these computers go into a switch, these ports do this, these other ports do this. You plug the mocap cameras into a PoE switch because they need power, but they can't be plugged in. And so you kind of understand, you take a diagram and you look more into it. If you see something on a set or wherever you are that looks interesting, as you say, I think curiosity is the one that really, really drives you to kind of work all this stuff out, right?
Yeah, you're generally curious about things that you care about more.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
finding that as the most valuable thing. Find something that you really are curious, genuinely curious about. So I was curious to ask you about your thoughts on the kind of evolution of some of this technology. We're moving through using things like traditional 3D tools, moving into Unreal Engine to do real-time CG and VFX, and some advances happening with V-Ray and Chaos Group and Project
Yeah.
Arena, and is obviously having a big conversation at the moment about the future of not just graphics, but also IT and all sorts of the things that you've been talking about. What are some of the things that you're seeing emerge?
I think it's really interesting to see the almost it's starting to be a pivotal shift around, traditionally VFX houses, Maya, V-Ray, Arnold, Nuke, that sort of thing. But now there's Blender, and it's really weird to say it, but Blender is definitely starting to, I think, start to corner the market a little bit, where, the entry, suddenly you have all of this software that's just free to you, right? Like Blender has what Maya has, it has what 3ds Max has. Sure, it doesn't really necessarily have what Nuke has, but you can kind of see it going down that path. And so there's VFX houses now are kind of, they're a bit confused, right? Because all their artists are diehard Maya or Nuke, whatever it may be. But Blender is a clear contender to all of this. And so it's kind of this funny sort of shift in what I call traditional software to now maybe untraditional software like Blender, Unreal, stuff like that. Stuff that people haven't necessarily thought of using yet, but are clearly seeing its benefit because it's, you can train yourself on it very, very easily. There's no barrier to get into it. You can just download it and use it and learn it. Blender, the fact that it has fluid simulation, built-in camera tracking, that sort of thing is huge. So I think this shift is just quite an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, it's amazing looking back to the beginning of when I started in being curious about this stuff, where you needed to use Maya on a silicon graphics machine, and the barrier
Yeah.
to entry was like impenetrable. Basically, it was $200,000 was the bar. Nobody has that. But at this
No,
point,
exactly.
$1,000 machine and a copy of Blender, and you're off to and even studios emerging now using those tools, not just hobbyists learning how it works,
Yeah,
but like
exactly.
actually poking into the professional zone as well.
Yeah. And I think that's really, really beneficial for the industry in general because suddenly what I struggled with when I was younger is I would like to learn all of this software, but like I'm a teenager. I definitely can't buy Maya. I don't have the machine necessarily to run Maya. And so you'd end up like learning on free software, but it's not, you kind of get an idea of what it would be like, but the muscle memory is all wrong and it's not quite as good as what you should be using. But now, kind of having this almost uniformity between I've been learning Blender because it's free and I can download it and use it, and I can now go to a studio and then use it still, I think is really powerful, especially for, up and coming sort of projects and newcomers to the industry and stuff like that.
No conversation about all of this would be complete without some mention of AI. So
Oh, yeah, yeah.
what are your thoughts on the current state? You're not a believer in trying to predict the future either, but at least the current state where it's useful or where it's suggesting that it could be useful.
Yeah. I've been on two shoots that have used AI generated content before, and there's benefits and then there's also downsides, right? Um, the benefit is they were very, very crunched for time. There was no way any artist on the planet was going to be able to create what they wanted to create in, essentially a 3 hour window. It's just impossible. So they generated some content. I think it was in Midjourney or something like that, which we then put on a volume. And the creation of it, the speed, obviously great, and it was very efficient for them to do that. And it was the only way it really could have worked. They still had to do, I'm going to say, post on the AI, because what came out of it was good, but once you blew it up to the scale of a volume, you start to realize, well, why is this boat kind of floating above the water? The things that on a laptop screen you don't really notice, but when you're blowing up to like a 10-meter tall by 20-meter wide LED wall, it's very, very obvious. And so they had to kind of take it back and do almost post work on that and then ship it back again. And so it's kind of, there's a benefit, but it's not quite there yet. I tend to be the believer that the biggest use case for AI, or the other big use case for AI, is not necessarily image generation or generative content, but it's actually the tools that we can get from this, right?
Yeah.
There's papers being published in using AI for UV unwrapping. We need to improve how DLSS functions. Instead of just putting it through like an RNN that reads forwards, we need to read backwards as well, so we can improve kind of like our spatial awareness. Because there's a lot of artifacting that comes from stuff like TSR, TAA, all which was put into Unreal Engine in Unreal 5. It does improve the efficiency of rendering, but it's not perfect. But, going down the route of empowering that stuff as well, I think is really, really interesting. Even into the post world of AI roto, tracking marker removal, stuff like that, where it's a tool that will genuinely help speed up production on the back end, as well as, real-time rendering, stuff like that, reducing artifacting. A lot of games that use DLSS, especially pre-DLSS 3, you get those ghosting effects that typically comes from it, because it's all based off previous frames that have been rendered out. And so it's working out how can we mitigate that. Because once we've nailed that, right, then suddenly these massive environments that we want to create they don't need to be as optimized as much. I still think optimizing is key, because especially if you're blueprinting, you need to make sure that what you're blueprinting is optimized, because once you take it to a volume, it could end up just crashing everything. But yeah, no, there's definitely, I guess what I'm saying is there's the image creation pipeline, and then there's also the tools that prop up what we already have. And I think that the tools that prop up what we have are really, really vital and will help speed up production.
Right. And like we were talking about before this, even more the people's desire to do some of those things is often not all that high. They're not so enthusiastic about doing some of that prep work. It's not the most creative part of the process in preparing all of these things to have creative things done to them, hopefully freeing us up to be able to spend more time on the things we like more, the things that are able to have more of an impact on the end result, freeing us up to make those decisions or spend more time on the fidelity of an asset or the creativity of a thing, as opposed to just getting it there at all.
Yeah, exactly. I think, some of the best shoots I've worked on were the shoots where You spend a month with a team of artists that produce some really, really good, efficient content that runs flawlessly on an LED wall. And then you take that through to a shoot day when it works great. But then it's having the tools on the back end to do the cleanup, to get through post quicker and something less painfully, I guess, that AI can definitely help empower.
Got to keep them working for us, not ahead of us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any like final things that you'd like to share with people? Maybe like places people could follow some of the work that you do personally or professionally.
Yeah, sure. My website is a good place to be. It shows you what I have worked on. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and I'll be more than happy to answer them. My website is www.jackdartforddesign.com. It kind of just gives you a bit of an overview about me and what I've done. That's good. But yeah,
Cool.
Always be curious. That's my thing. Curiosity gets you a long way. And if you dig deep enough in the rabbit hole, you'll figure a lot of things out, I think.
That's going to be maybe the title of the show. Always be curious. It's a great thing to be. I think whilst it killed the cat, it also birthed many careers, and all works of art essentially come from
exactly.
curiosity, creative exploration of interesting ideas. Well, I love the work that you're doing, your own work as well. That's really interesting. I think something which is sometimes really difficult to do when you're doing this for a living, given the hours and the intensity of it, to actually understanding that you maybe a final tiny question is to ask how being on something like Megalopolis and still doing your own work. Sometimes I've done quite a bit of that myself and run into people asking that question a lot, like how do you keep the passion alive? How do you find time for your own projects? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's definitely not easy. I think I found it more challenging now because I'm even busier now than I was then. But it's about, especially if it's something personal, if it really speaks to you, like that did for me, nothing will really get in the way, and you'll always kind of fight through it. I ended up doing lots of 3 a.m. stuff. I definitely maybe don't do that. But it's having the drive for something, when you have something that clear in your head and you want to convey a message, especially if it's artistic. And, normally that will just kind of follow through and you'll just relentlessly hammer away at it until it goes. But yeah, it's about setting time for yourself, right? It's really important, especially in today's world where everything's so constant and fast and there's nothing that's very static anymore. It's about just stopping and kind of saying, okay, let's just give myself a couple of hours or half a day, or whatever, of just, put the phone down and just focus on what I want to do creatively. It's good, I think.
Yeah, it's important. Put the phone down, everybody.
Yeah.
Go and do something for yourself. The equivalent when I was growing up was the show in England, Blue Peter, and I think it was that one where they used to say, no, it wasn't. It was a different show. Anyway, the sentiment was the same, but around the television, and it was turn the TV off and go do something more interesting instead. Effectively, like go work on your own creativity, because that's very purposeful and rewarding and important.
Yeah. And it really furthers your understanding of, especially if it's like, technical art, it will really further your understanding of how it all goes together. Because again, you'll have that personal power and wanting to just blast through something to kind of allow you to go down these rabbit holes even more efficiently, because you want to pick up that information and kind of progress fast as well.
Well, there's a very good sign for me has always been something that you want to stay up till 3 a.m. doing is clearly something that you care about. And
yeah, exactly.
That's it. Whilst you got to, I get your idea of looking after yourself and trying not to do that all the time, ending up where you're willing to do it is a good sign.
Exactly. And I think that's really important. It's something that I've fallen down the rabbit hole a lot, especially lately as well, is I haven't been creative, so I must do something creative. And that's like the complete opposite way of doing it. It's kind of letting it naturally come to you and then work on that. Even if you don't finish it, it's having something that you are doing, that you're actively working on. I think It just makes you feel better, especially if you're creatively starved during the day. Getting home and having something to work on, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't have to be the next blockbuster film, animated film, which is something that, like a skill or something. It's just it makes you feel slightly more human, I think. It does to me anyway.
Yeah, no, me too. And often those things that break through into being really successful, you ask the people that made them, and they had no idea that they were going to be that successful
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
first place. Anyway, they just were following that signal. Is there a way that signal for you shows up, like a thing that you're like, now that happened, that means I know that I want to follow this and do this?
Yeah, I think so. So like, when I did my art installation, that to me was it's kind of a weird experience because I was working entirely remotely for it until 2 days before it went live, and getting back into London and looking at it, it was very. I think it really freaked me out because it's my first art installation. It's something very personal to me that's about to be on display to like a lot of people. But having done that, it's the feeling of, you know, I think I did something good there. I would like to continue doing that sort of thing. And it's that drive that will always push you forward, I think, is once you're in the groove of doing something, once you've done it once sort of thing, once you've made your first like Unreal Engine short or whatever it may be, it's knowing and telling yourself that you can do it, It's not about thinking, oh, is it good enough? It's just about doing it. Something that I get constantly stuck with is, well, it's not going to be, you know, amazing. It's not going to win an Oscar or whatever. It's like, well, no, because it's quite, it's quite unlikely. But it's having the drive to just do it and make something, is really, really important.
Right. Yeah, that feeling being the driver rather than it
Yes,
being
exactly.
something that you think that you're supposed to do or that you've been told to do, or whilst
Yeah.
those things are necessary in life. There's somebody in the chat here saying, you mean you feel like you're having fun?
Yes,
That could
exactly.
be
That's
a way
that's
of
a much
saying it.
better way of putting it, I think. Yeah. Yeah, is you kind of tune into because something that I fall into a lot is you, especially when you're doing a technical job all the time, you don't necessarily forget how to be creative, but it's like a muscle, right? You haven't gone to the creative gym in a while, and it just doesn't come as naturally as it used to. And from my own experience, like I panicked quite a bit because I was like, well, I used to always be doing stuff, and now I'm not doing as much stuff. But it's kind of almost embracing that a little bit and just pondering about different ways to use technology, different patterns even in your head that kind of come to you. It's sort of working out how to tie it all together and do something with that. Again, even if it's learning something, how to make audio reactive stuff in Touch Design or something like that. And then once you've done that, you kind of go down like a weird rabbit hole of, oh, this is kind of interesting. I'm going to try adding this node or doing this, and you'll end up making something without even realizing you're making something.
No, letting that curiosity take you on a journey.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very cool. I love making stuff in touch, audio reactive stuff in Touch Design. You made me want to go do that now.
It's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very cool.
Yeah, well, really, really fun and fascinating conversation around all kinds of things that we're exploring in a new space in the world, a new version of the world every year that goes by, and us as artists and creative technical people are the ones hopefully driving it forwards. I love the spirit and the story that we got to explore today, and I look forward
That's
to
good.
digging into your work a little bit and finding out more of what you're up to. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your
No,
day
anytime.
and
Anytime.
sharing your story with everybody.
Yeah, that's been great. It's been great. Always stay curious.
Stay curious, everybody.
Yep.
Absolutely. Put the phone down.
That's
Yeah,
been good.
thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. Maybe we can have you back sometime and get some updates. Thank you also to our audience for coming in, asking some cool questions, and look forward to our next episode in a couple of weeks. We'll be back with another open day in April. I stay curious, everybody. That's probably going to be the title now. But I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you again, Jack.
Anytime. Bye, everyone.